Today we have the unstoppable force against the immovable object. Garry Kasparov against Ulf Andersson. Kasparov, of course, the greatest attacker of his generation, maybe of any generation. And Ulf Andersson, known for not only his defensive ability, but his ability to take away any counterplay from his opponent, sort of snuff out all of their activity. But when he played Kasparov, things didn't always turn out that way. Interesting in this game, Kasparov plays a little bit more like Ulf Andersson, a fascinating encounter played in 1985 in Belgrade. Let us jump right in. Kasparov has white, Andersson has black. D4 from Kasparov, knight f6, c4, e6, and g3. A Catalan opening coming up from Kasparov. d5, bishop to g2. And this is a very powerful opening. This bishop places a lot of pressure on black down this long diagonal. Bishop to e7, knight to f3, castles, queen to c2, d takes c4, queen takes c4, all normal opening theory, and a6, perhaps with the idea of playing b5 and then bishop to b7 to challenge white's bishop on g2. Kasparov plays bishop to f4, immediately attacking the c7 pawn. Black has to do something about that, so he plays bishop to d6. And now Kasparov plays knight to e5, gaining space, well, with a piece, and placing that knight on a very nice square. Black would prefer not to take that knight because Kasparov would gain space and get the bishop pair. You don't want to give that to white. So Andersson plays knight to d5. Now, this move helps to block the bishop at g2, and it also threatens to grab the bishop pair by taking the bishop at f4 off of the board. But Kasparov ignores that threat and just gets his piece out, knight to c3, and he allows the capture of the bishop. Andersson takes that bishop at f4. Kasparov retakes with the g-pawn. Black does have the bishop pair now, but Kasparov has a very strong knight at e5. Defended by two pawns, he has a very compact central pawn structure. And in order to eject this knight, Black would really have to play f6, which he doesn't want to do because it would weaken e6 and the central light squares. Knight to d7, e3, and we can see how nice and compact this central pawn structure is. Queen to e7, castles. And right now, because of this Catalan bishop at g2, Black is having a very hard time developing his own bishop at c8 because there's all of this pressure on the b7 pawn. If he moves it, he could lose the pawn. So rook to b8 to defend b7, maybe advance that pawn without losing the rook, and maybe get that bishop out. Knight to e4, Kasparov just moves his knight to a much stronger square. After knight to f6, knight to c5, we see the pressure sort of piling up. The knight assists the bishop, and it's pressure on b7. And so far, Kasparov is playing positional chess. He's not trying to crash in on the king side, which he was so effective at doing. And now here, Andersson plays c6. His decision is based on trying to limit the scope of this powerful bishop, but this structure isn't really that great for Black, and it invites a strategy from white called the minority attack. Many of you might be familiar with this idea. What white basically wants to do is advance the A and B pawns and trade off these two pawns for two of these three pawns. And that would leave Black with one pawn. But that pawn would be isolated and weak and a target for white's play. And that's Kasparov's strategy over the next few moves. He plays b4, advancing the minority attack. Black plays king to h8 because he is going to want to play f6 at some point, move the knight and play f6, and this queen would be staring right at the king on that loosened diagonal. So he plays king to h8 to get away from the aim of that queen. a4, Kasparov just continues his minority attack. Knight to d5, hoping to block the bishop, but then just b5. Very systematic, focused plan from white. f6 is played to evict the knight, but it does create a weakness here on e6, so he's got to worry about that. The knight goes to d3. Pawn takes, pawn takes, pawn takes, queen takes. And the strategy has worked. Black has this isolated pawn at b7, which is a nice target. Now, it is a passed pawn, so sometimes passed pawns can be an asset. But here, the pawn is clearly a target. It's not going anywhere. and Kasparov is going to put his laser sights on that pawn. Rook to d8, rook to a7. The rook attacks the pawn. Bishop takes knight, a concession. Black gives up the bishop pair, but the knights were better than the bishops here anyway. That knight at c5 was vicious. But it's replaced by another knight at c5. But now bishop to d7, counterattacking the queen, and now Kasparov takes that bishop off of the board, doesn't want it settling on c6 where it could be a decent defensive piece. And rook takes d7. So black hopes to hold here, but white has a better minor piece. This knight on d5 is protected by a pawn, but it's a little unstable, as we will see here in a second. And there's this target at b7 that Kasparov can just keep working on. So how does Kasparov weaken this knight's position at d5? Well, he plays f5. The idea is to undermine the pawn defense of the knight. If pawn were to take pawn, then the bishop could take the knight, and it would just win a piece. G6 is played by Andersson. An interesting decision, gives his king a little bit of room. After pawn takes, queen takes, the knight is still sufficiently defended. White can't take it, but it's even more unstable because it's not being defended by a pawn, but by a queen and a rook. Kasparov doubles on the a file, king to g7, queen to b3, putting some pressure on that knight. And here, Andersson makes an interesting decision, knight to f4, offering the exchange of queens. Usually with Kasparov, you wouldn't want to, you do want queens off of the board, but Kasparov is happy to do it here. Queen takes queen, knight takes e6, and white clearly stands better. The bishop much stronger than the knight, the pawn structure better, and again, the b7 pawn is just weak. Rook to b1 to apply pressure from the front, knight to d8 because the pawn was attacked 3 times, so he now has to defend it 3 times. Bishop to f3, one of those moves where, black is having a hard time finding anything to do. Bishop f3, maybe he'll go wrong. Rook to c8. Now, it looks like he's leaving the pawn hanging. 3 are attacking now, only 2 are defending. But if the bishop were to take here, then rook to b8 would pin that bishop, and then black would have the advantage. So what Kasparov does is he plays rook to a5 to reroute that rook. So now he could take on b7 without having to worry about that pin. So now he's doubling up from the front, trying to hit b7. Rook c to c7, rook a to b5. Everything is attacking that pawn. f5 is played by black, maybe looking to play f4. That white would not be able to take because it would undermine e5. But then h4 is played. Kasparov is doing the same thing with the one weakness in the position. He wants to play h5 and eliminate it. King to f7 was played. He could have played f4, but king to f7 is good enough, or as good as it's going to be for him. h5, white, looking to get rid of his one weakness. If black takes here, then rook takes f5 check, and his pawns would be very weak. So king goes back to g7, king to g2, rook to e7, and watch how Kasparov slowly improves every single piece, and black can't do anything about it. Every single piece is going to be on a better square here in a few moves. Watch every single piece go to a better location. Rook to b6, aiming at the g6 square, rook to f7. Now bishop to d5, a strong location for the bishop. It kind of stalemates the knight. There's nowhere the knight can move where that bishop couldn't take it if he wanted to. So the bishop sort of overpowers the knight at d8. Rook f to d7 hits the bishop, but Kasparov likes that bishop where it is. So rook 1 to b5, defending it with the rook. Rook to e7, king to g3, aiming to come into f4 and enter the position. Rook e to d7. Kasparov takes on g6. That gets rid of his weakness. But now he has this nice square. The king can enter and give black a lot of trouble. King to f4, with the idea of playing king to g5 and then taking on g6 with check. That's what he would like to do. And Andersson counterattacks the pawn at f2, and Kasparov just ignores it. He knows he's going to get so much counterplay after king to g5 that he says black can just have f2. Andersson takes that pawn, but then rook takes g6 check. King to f8. Now bishop to b3, attacking the f5 pawn, unveiling the rook's attack on f5. Knight to f7 check, and then king to f6. This is an interesting strategy you see in endgames where the stronger side will use the defender's pawn as a shield. And the king is using this pawn as a shield from the rook that is at f2 right now. Black plays f4. If he checks with rook to d6, then just bishop to e6, and this pawn is hanging. There's, white is fine after that move. So f4 is played. Kasparov just passes it by. He plays e4, and the pawn at d4 can't be taken because bishop would just take the knight. In that case, he's threatening mate, and if the rook checks, he just brings the bishop back to e6. So rook to b2, putting some pressure on that bishop, but that's not a problem. Kasparov just plays e5, threatening to fork with e6. f3, Black hopes to maybe do something with that f-pawn. He could queen with check maybe and get something from that. Kasparov again ignores it, just e6, forking the rook and the knight. f2, and then this move, bishop to c4, not only offering the exchange of rooks, but the bishop keeps control of the queening square, so Black cannot queen the pawn. He would just take it. Now, in this position, seeing the writing on the wall, Andersson resigned. Let's see what might happen. Let's say he plays rook takes, bishop takes, and again, this square is under control. And let's say he plays rook to d6, which just pins the pawn, so the knight can't be taken. The problem is Kasparov can just play d5. So that's not even an issue at all. If the knight goes to d8, then rook to g2 can be played, threatening to take the pawn, and the bishop controls this. If rook takes d5, then e7 is actually checkmate. he doesn't even have to worry about picking up the knight and queening. That's a mating position. So that was a possible line that could have emerged there. Interesting to see the great attacker Garry Kasparov beat Ulf Andersson at his own game. I hope you've enjoyed this game. See you again soon at Chess Dog. Goodbye.